everyone, Suzanne here. I hope you're all well and welcome to Sew Custom. Today's video is going to be the making of this little number. So if you're interested in seeing that, then let's get started. So I'm using this 100% viscose fabric I bought from the textile centre. Really nice and floaty fabric, lovely for summer. And this time I'm just moving straight on to cutting out. I'm using my rotary cutter here rather than scissors, as this fabric is lovely but very slippery, and using the rotary cutter helps me out in keeping the fabric in one place and not moving about too much as I'm cutting. So this is actually the front piece I've just cut out here. I just mislabeled it back and onto the back. Same thing again, just cutting out, and I have a notch at the center of the back. This fabric is on the fold. Same as the front piece, and then a couple of notches at the arm just so that I know that this is the back. And for this pattern itself, I've just used my dartless bodice block, and I have measured down from the neck, both front and back, about 4 inches, drawn a line straight across my pattern piece and chopped it off. And for my sleeve, I'm using a fluted sleeve. I have just uploaded a video, I think on Monday, which shows how to make any pattern piece really fluted. So I shall link that down below if you haven't seen it. And then the last pattern pieces I have to cut out is 2 bands for around the neck and shoulders. And I have 2 layers of fabric on the fold underneath my pattern piece here that will give me those 2 bands. Just a couple of little notches at the center of the bands, and that will help me out later on when I come to place this on the bodice. And that's all the cutting out complete. So I've decided on this top that I'm going to sew my seams in the French style. So in order for me to do that, I have placed my front back bodice piece on top of my back with wrong sides together. And in order for me to sew up these in the French style, I have to sew these seams twice. So firstly, as I say, with my bodice pieces wrong sides together, I've placed my fabric underneath my presser foot with the fabric edge lined up to the edge of the foot. I have my needle all the way over to the right as far as I can get it, and this will give me a nice narrow hem allowance there, or seam allowance I should say. But I'm going to trim that seam allowance down a little bit further, because the next step in the French seaming is to turn my fabric wrong sides together and sew that seam again, and that will finish my French seams. To help me out in doing it and making sure that I'm being accurate about it, I'm just pressing along the edge of that seam. What I'm trying to do here is make sure that my stitch line that I've already sewn is right on the edge. Then pinning it again and to the sewing machine to finish the French seam. So I've lined my fabric up again in exactly the same way, but this time I have my needle a little bit further to the left. So I want to make sure I enclose that seam that I sewed firstly. So this way it just gives a really nice finish on the inside, very clean, and I like that. So I'm doing exactly the same thing with the arm seams. So lining up those seams wrong sides together initially. Running that through the machine in the same way as I did before with the narrow hem and my needle as far over to the right as I can get it. Back stitching at the start and the end. And then I won't make you sit through this whole process again. So I've trimmed that fabric down, I've pressed it, pinned it, and now I'm just finishing off that French seam. So just in exactly the same way as I did before. So my needle's a little bit further over to the left this time and just finishing off that seam. Neat and tidy, love that. And all I've done here is I've ran my hems, so the hem of the bodice and the hem of the sleeve through the overlocker, just to make sure everything's nice and tidy. I've then pressed up the hems on both of those pieces. And now to the machine to sew those up. So back stitching at the start, this is the hem of the bodice. Just running a straight stitch, a little bit of a longer stitch this time than I'd used previously. Back stitching at the end, and that's the hem of my bodice done. And now on to the sleeve. Back stitching at the start again, taking it nice and slowly around the curves of the sleeve. Back stitching at the end. And that's my sleeve done. Super neat and tidy. And of course I do the same thing on the other sleeve. And now I just want to attach the sleeve to the bodice. So I'm French seaming this seam as well. So I'm joining the sleeve to the bodice at the underarm, wrong sides together, and pinning around. So this is the same way as I would insert any sleeve, I'm just doing it twice. So in the same way as I sewed up the bodice, I have my fabric aligned to the side of the presser foot. I have my needle as far over to the right as I can get it. And off camera, I am just trimming that down, pressing it, and then I'm coming in for my second stitch along that seam. So again, my needle is a little bit further over to the left, just to make sure I catch all of that fabric in underneath so that it's enclosed within that seam. And that's how that looks. And as I mentioned before, super neat and tidy. I really love this finish on viscose fabrics or nice drapey fabrics. So just a couple more things to do. So I need to stitch my two band pieces together. So I have them wrong sides together and I'm just running a straight stitch at my 1 centimeter seam allowance along the long side of that band, back stitching at the start and the end. And that's how that looks. And I'm just going to press that and then join up the two short sides, right sides together, so that I end up with a circle of fabric. Sewing again at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, back stitching at the start and the end. And that's my neckband all sewn together. And now I just want to attach that to the bodice. So I have a couple of notches there that I'm just lining up with the center front of the bodice, and then I'm just pinning the entire way around, so across the neckline, across the top of the sleeve, around the back and across the second sleeve. And now I'm just going to sew that together at my 1 centimeter seam allowance, back stitching at the start, back stitching at the end. And now one side of my band is attached to my bodice. So now nearly the last thing we have to do is attach the elastic. So I'm going to pop the elastic in here in the seam allowance. So I'm adding just a small piece of elastic that I've measured across my shoulder. I'm pinning each end of it about 1 inch away from the seam of the arm. So 1 inch into the neckline, both front and back. And I'm just going to run that through the machine with a zigzag stitch. And I'm running my zigzag stitch back and forth a couple of times just to make sure it's super secure. Doing the same on both sides. So that's my elastic in. I've pressed up 1 centimeter seam allowance on the inside of that band, and now all I need to do is close the whole lot up and this little top is finished. So to close it up, I'm going to stitch in the ditch. So I have my needle directly through that seam line of the band. I'm working on the front side of the fabric and I'm trying to be really careful that I catch the inner side of that band in underneath. Back stitching at the start and the end, and that's how that looks. And across the elastic as well. Really nice. And I am done. So I love how this top has turned out. It's super comfortable across the shoulders, just the right amount of stretch. This is it untucked and tucked. I love the sleeves, very floaty. This is so nice and cool in this hot weather. Love it.
So I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, please do, and I shall see you on Friday in my next one. Until then, I hope you have a fantastic week. Bye folks!